Welcome to the last panel of today, which we have called What Now, Adarob. In the present war situation, the Red Sea state and its capital, Port Sudan, has become a refugee for people fleeing the war. As a place, it has changed from being peripheral to central, and thereby directing new focus on the state and the largest group of indigenous people there, the Badja. And for all non-Sudanese, Adarob is just a nickname for a person from the Badja. So the Badja have fought against marginalization for a long time. On a longer historic timescale, however, they used to be a fair group of fighters, controlling their land, rich on resources, and with a strategic geopolitical location. So in this roundtable, we will first outline and discuss the rich history and cultural heritage of the Badja peoples and how their traditional livelihoods are adapted to what is perceived as a marginal environment. We will then turn to the present situation and see how they navigate the new political landscape. And we will try to draw the long lines to better understand the Badja context and use it to view the present in the light of the past. So with me, I have three experts, and my name is Giske Andersen. I'm an associate professor in the geography department and has been privileged to work in Eastern Sudan since I first went there in 2001. So with me, I have these three experts that have deep knowledge in different fields. So we are a little bit interdisciplinary panel, and we will try to look at the area from different perspectives. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to bring any of our Red Sea University colleagues here, but whom we have been working closely with the last 10 years. But luckily, we have a Badja representative with us here in Bergen, Dr. Siant Mohammed Babikar. Mohammed has been here for a long time, almost 30 years. And he's what I would call a Bergenese Badja. He's actually the first Badja, in my knowledge, to graduate with a PhD from UiB. But he's been growing up in Sinkat and was early involved in the RESUP project and invited to Bergen to do his master's in hydrology. And then this was directly followed by his PhD in the same subject. And he's now working in the Nansen Environmental and Remote Sensing Center. And with his close relation to the area, he has the insider's perspective on the present situation in the area and the role of the Badja. And just as a maybe fun fact, uniquely enough, he's also probably the only Badja working in the Arctic. Then we have with us Dr. Julian Cooper, who is an archaeologist and Egyptologist from Macquarie University. He has held postdoctoral fellowships at Oxford and Yale universities, and his research focuses on the archaeology and history of Nubia, the ancient Sudan, with an interest in ancient nomadism, desert surveying, and the history of the Etbai Desert in Eastern Sudan. So Etbai is the word for all the eastern desert in north of Sudan and Egypt. He recently obtained an Australian Research Council Future Fellowship, and in this Etbai survey project, he will investigate the underexplored Eastern Sudan that we will hear more about soon. And the last panelist is Knut Krywinski, Professor Emeritus. And he was one, as we already learned earlier today, one of the Bergen School pioneers in the Red Sea state. He has a background in botany and vegetation history, and he was leading the botanical research in the RESUP project, during which he spent long field seasons in Sinkat and in the Red Sea Hills. And during these days, he developed a deep interest in the Badja people, their history, traditional livelihoods, and cultural heritage. And the latter was further developed through his long-term cooperation with the late Professor Richard Holton Pierce, another Bergen Sudan pioneer, and they published together a book, Deserting the Desert, based on their work in this region. And Knut has traveled regularly to the Red Sea Hills since his first visit in 1986. And for those knowing to Bedawi, the local language, he has the nickname Egrim among his Badger colleagues and friends. Maybe Knut can explain later on what that means. Okay, so we will start by looking at Port Sudan and the recent situation there. So Port Sudan, as you know, is the capital of the Red Sea state, and Port Sudan, we don't really know, at least I didn't manage to find the number of population there, but it's mentioned between 500,000, maybe 1 million people. But urbanization has been very significant for decades due to work opportunities in the harbor, drought, migration, refugee influx, and conflict displacement of people. And yesterday we also heard that around 4.5 million people are internally displaced after the war broke out, and many of them went to Port Sudan since it's still a safe area. So I was wondering, Mohammed, maybe you can start telling us a little bit how the war has affected the daily life in Port Sudan.
Okay, I think I will start when you say because it's a safe. Port Sudan is not only the safe, but it has the war led to another. It is now the administrative capital of Sudan, if we can say that. Okay, the Port Sudan is not exceptional when it came after the conflict. The people who arrived first there are the people who have connected with Port Sudan, like relatives. You have some relative there, or you belong to Port Sudan or to the area. Then start the Western embassies start to evacuate from Khartoum. After the conflict is getting really serious, because at the beginning, most of the people, they didn't leave because they thought that it will be a kind of short-term things. If they move just around Khartoum, like going to Al Jazeera, Madani. These are the areas you can go and come back faster. But what happened when evacuation happened from Khartoum, especially from Wadi Sedna, which is in Omdurman, that is a military air base, after a while, then it start to be like, okay, this is the people who can move fast from Port Sudan. What will happen to the other foreign citizens? The United Nations moved their mission to Port Sudan, and accordingly, a lot of people start to use Port Sudan as a base for evacuations. So that kind of increase the number of population in Port Sudan or increase stress on what they have there. Okay, after a while, after that, the government department, some of the departments start to move to Port Sudan. Like some of the main departments start to move to Port Sudan. That is when they start to see, okay, the United Nations is there. And I think one of the missions is there that is also the one that is related to the conflict solving in Sudan. The mission that was based in Khartoum, they moved at the beginning, after that to Port Sudan. So it starts to be base. After a while, it starts to be like the administrative capital in a way. After that, it came to, in addition to the, being a base for evacuation, they use two sources here. They use a port and they use the airport in Port Sudan. But at that time, you have to have a kind of you have to have a permission for flying to Port Sudan in and out from the government. So it was not open to all flights. This is recently, Al-Burhan, after left Khartoum, he came to Port Sudan and he used it as a base for him to travel abroad. People to travel abroad, they need passport. So the only printing machine, if I can call it, or what they call it, I think the printing machine in Port Sudan. They import new machine, I think, offered by the Qatar government. So that's the printing base for all the passport now is in Port Sudan. So a lot of people who want passport, they have to come to Port Sudan. In addition, Egypt closed the border with in Wadi Halfa. And also, you are not to travel to Egypt unless you have a visa. In the past, you can travel for all people, for women, children, and men above 50. So now you have to get a visa. From when you can get a visa, you get it from Port Sudan. The only embassy working or the only place that you can get a visa is Port Sudan. The prices are really high. For the visa itself, I think it goes between 1,500 to 2,000 US dollars. Okay, now we come to what happened to the how that influenced the people of Port Sudan itself. If we are talking generally, as any places, prices for renting is really high. There's no salaries. The only place that the only sector that gets salaries are military and I forget to say that, okay, the main employer in Port Sudan, that is the Port Corporation. So these are the people who get their salary. The health sector, education, there's no salary for that. They only got 3 salaries from the 6 months now. So that is the exactly right. Prices are really high. I mean, like for renting, because it's tripled now, for renting a house in Port Sudan, because I mean, like people at the beginning, they start to receive people in like, especially for foreigners who are evacuated through Port Sudan, they start to receive them making camps in schools and in centers for them to leave from there. And they use ships to Saudi Arabia, and from Saudi Arabia, they evacuated to the rest of the world.
So Knut, you also talked to some of our colleagues in Port Sudan. What could they tell you about the situation?
Well, it to a large degree confirms what Mohammed is saying. The situation is, they refer it as safe, but that it's crowded. They say that the whole Khartoum is there, so there's hardly any room for them. They also complain about the pricing, especially on housing, but also on food and other things for livelihood. But interesting enough, there was one rather new information that I puzzled me. That they say that some Beja has, due to the situation, have returned to the hills, and even taking up new activities like gardening vegetables, which is not quite common for Beja, not in the more remote hills anyway. So this might be because the price level of housing and so on, food is so high that it's less stressful to move out of the city and return to your homes. Remember that wage labor in Port Sudan is an important extra income for rural Beja. They come there in times of in bad times when there is little to obtain from home, or when there is a lot of good jobs there as an extra income. And now there is little of that, and cost is high, and they simply return. The situation is good. There was good rains, summer rains this summer, and the grazing in the at least on the western slopes and in the summit are good. So it's very calming information about the situation as such.
Thank you. So this will bring us on to the next point, which will focus more on the Beja. And these are just 2 maps. And I want to point out that this is just a rough illustration about how some of the tribes are located in the areas. It's not like carved in stones. This border issues is very touchy. So yeah, just so you know the setting of that. And the second map is something Julian will come into in a little while. Then I want to ask you again, Mohammed, can you, so we already introduced the Beja, they are the largest indigenous group in the Red Sea state. And can you tell us a little bit more about who they are? Yeah.
Who they are, according to now, I mean, because Beja, that is Bidawiyet, that is from the language is Bidawiyet, and that is the language they are speaking. So it is when you say Beja, that is Bidawiyet speakers. Bedouin speakers, when I say Bedouin speaker, I will say that the main tribes here by size, we have a Bisharin, they are living in the northern part. We have the Amarar, they are living in the central part. And we have the Hadendawa, who live like extend to Kassala. That not mean that there are other small tribes, also they are Bija, because they are Bedouin speakers in the area. There are other groups, they are not Bedouin speakers, and I think that is more Bani Amir. They have Tigray or Tigrinja. It's more related to language that is in Eritrea. So it is a kind of a border between. So this is the kind of the main tribes, and that is the kind of the what Bija coming from.
And their main livelihoods, as Knut briefly mentioned, is pastoral nomadism. And before going more into the livelihoods today, I want to ask you, Julian. We already know that the Beja have a long history in the area, but new evidence, thanks to you and your other archaeological colleagues with interest in this area, you're also finding new evidence. Can you give us an outline of what we know about the ancestral Beja today?
Just to give some background to my research, about 6 years ago, I started moving my research from Egypt to Eastern Sudan and Red Sea state. And since then, I've just been amazed at the things that with colleagues in Sudan and elsewhere we've been able to find. As many of you will probably be aware, the history and archaeology of the Nile Valley is very well known, and there's so many archaeological expeditions and things to lots and lots of places in Sudan, like Merowe and Jebel Barkal. But Red Sea province is not so well known in terms of its archaeology. And even the historical sources haven't been really sifted through and analyzed very well. So I started this project trying to understand the history of this region. And it is a very intertwined region, I would say. It's always on the border of Egypt. It's on the border of Kushite ancient civilization. And it's even on the border of Aksumite civilization. So when you study the textual sources for the ancient Beja or ancestral Beja, you need to be able to interpret documents from all these different languages like Ge'ez, Coptic, Greek, Latin, Arabic, ancient Egyptian, and so forth. So it's been a challenge, not only for me, but for previous scholars coming into the future. And this map I produced here shows possibly the greatest extent we've been able to map ancestral Beja using both combining textual and archaeological sources. And it is a struggle. Most archaeologists in the room and historians in the room will know that these evidence bases don't always intertwine and map very well together. Archaeology often tells you something very different to history and textual sources. And for the textual sources, it is really fascinating. If you can go to the next slide, we have textual data for ancestral Beja, if you want to call it, but in ancient Egyptian texts, they're called Medjai, for the peoples of the Eastern Desert at least. And these sources go back about as far as 2400 BC. So that's the oldest textual attestations we have of peoples in Red Sea province, roughly, or Eastern Sudan, what we would call the Atbai. And the interesting thing from documents like this, just to show you, these figures here are the ones on this particular these are the ones that are labeled in the hieroglyphic text as Medjai. This comes from a sarcophagus, a coffin of an Egyptian queen. And some of the names of these people are names that myself and other scholars have been able to analyze as being from a very ancient form of the Bedouin language. And this is quite interesting because rarely can you find a language traced so far into the past. Like ancient Egyptian, we know, of course, and Greek and Latin and all these sort of languages, Kushite, many languages in Northeast Africa and the Middle East. But this is a language that has been more or less ignored by scholars, and we can trace not the texts themselves, but the names of specific individuals to the Bedouin language going back across 4,000 years. Even some ancient documents mention that Cleopatra, the famous queen of Egypt, could speak what they called troglodytic then, but which would have been ancestral Bedouin. And then we have these archaeological sources, and this is why I began going into Red Sea province to launch surveys of various areas of Red Sea province, particularly those areas which were threatened by gold mining and areas that NCAM and colleagues in Sudan outlined where we should take this research. And this has been really illuminating as well. We've been able to find lots and lots of new data for nomadic occupations all throughout Sudan, over almost 7,000 years of occupation from these surveys. And this is telling us lots of new things, like, for example, in the northern part of the Atbai, they used to have cattle and they can no longer have cattle. So here we have like a theme of climate change where approximately 2,000 to 3,000 BC, the rain started failing and the Beja had to adapt their nomadic herding to a very different type of herding, which no longer had cattle, and the camel had not yet arrived, so they just had goat. And then they would have to wait almost 2,000 years to roughly somewhere around 0 to 200 AD, the times of the Roman Empire, for the camel to arrive in Northeast Africa, or at least Eastern Sudan. And this again would change everything in the landscape. They now could travel further. The mobility you can have when you have camel nomadism is very different to the mobility you have with goat nomadism or cattle nomadism. It's only in the very southern part of Beja lands near Kassala where they can keep all these animals together. The other thing that comes very clearly out of the archaeological and textual sources is what I call the nomad diaspora. And the idea of diaspora, I think, has been discussed in almost every panel we've had these last few days. Now, it's if you're no matter if it's a textual source or an archaeological source, we find evidence of ancient Beja living in every big settlement, all the way from Upper Egypt down as far south as Merowe. And we can see this both from the pottery. The ancient Beja had a specific form of pottery which we would use, which we use as a sign of trade routes and where they're traveling to. And we see this also from textual sources. And the textual sources are really, really interesting. They tell us that they sought different sorts of employment on the Nile River. And there's a modern analogy of this, of course, of Beja seeking employment in the docks and harbors in Port Sudan. And the form of employment could be anything. It could be from camel driving, temple guards, police officers, hunters, military escorts, and all these sorts of things. The other theme that comes out really readily in studying Beja history is the resources of this province. It's one of the biggest areas of gold mines in all of Africa and the Middle East. And ancient Egyptians started mining gold here at a fairly early day. In fact, I shouldn't say that. We don't actually know who started mining gold, but the earliest gold mines we have go back to about 3000 BC, and some scholars think even earlier. And this created a big cycle almost every winter season of foreigners coming into the Red Sea province, and they would come in to mine gold and interact with the nomads. And this interaction I'll talk about a little bit later, but it completely changed the history of these peoples because now they were on the Nile, bringing their herds to the Nile, and also lots of people were coming into their desert. When it comes to their social organization, how they were organized, we don't really know much from these ancient sources, and archaeology, it's very difficult to reconstruct things like social and political organization. But for a period where I showed that map from roughly 400 to 550 CE, the Blemis, as they were called at the time, the ancestral Beja, seem to have arisen out of their homeland in the Red Sea Hills and started raiding the Nile, even conquering parts of the Nile River, particularly in what we would call Lower Nubia, what's now the border area of Egypt and Sudan. And they also conquered a small area of the Nile near modern-day Luxor. And in this time, we know a little bit, just a small bit about their social organization. They had chiefs, they had people under chiefs. Chiefs is just a rough translation. You could say sheikh or whatever. And then we also know in this period, and this is from an Arab historian, Ibn Sulaym al-Aswani, and he says there was a period in which all the Beja chiefs obeyed another chief. So they had something like a trans-desert political organization that went all the way from the northern parts of their desert, northern parts of the Atbai, to southern parts of the Atbai. And they had some sort of system where all these leaders, these tribal leaders, you might call them, seemed to band together. And we know this, that the Arab geographers talk about this as happening in the past. So the Arab geographers start talking about Eastern Sudan roughly in 900 CE. So in the past, before they arrived to North Africa, they knew of this time when all these peoples were together. And these Arab geographers also talk a little bit about their social organization, their transhumance, so where they were traveling from the Red Sea Hills to the coast and so forth. And from these sources as well, that we know that the Beja helped in all these harbors on the Red Sea coast. Some of these were Hajj ports like Adarob and Suakin, and some of them were trade ports as well. And I'll pass it on now.
Thank you, Julian. That's very interesting to get that overview. And where you ended with the transhumance and livelihoods, I'll ask you, Knut, to follow up. You came to the Red Sea Hills, as I mentioned already, in the late 80s, and you revisited the area regularly and developed a keen interest in the traditional livelihoods, coping strategies, and land use among the Beja. So I was wondering if you could describe a little bit about the recent, or during your time there, recent to present livelihoods among the rural Beja.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because we expected the Beja themselves described themselves as nomads or pastoral people, but when we started to look around, it turned up that they were a lot. They were charcoal burners, they were cultivators, agro-cultivators, and very few actually was living a nomadic lifestyle. Now this picture was gradually it broadened our scope when we started to travel to more distance and far away remote places where the Beja hadn't been so much transferred to modern livelihood or to modern ideas. So we actually more and more found places where people still moved, both the long distance movement seasonally between the home and the Gunub in the winter to catch up with the winter rains, and Olive where the summer rains, that means on the eastern slopes from the mountains. But then also it became more difficult to classify them when we look on a very local level. Some of the tribes were actually just living a transhumance life where they moved between very short distances, but from one little valley to the other, very often at different heights above sea level, and very rarely moved to the distant pastures. And it seems that this is a system that is very variable depending on the actual condition, yearly conditions and the periodic conditions. And keeping in mind that the climatic situation is governed by two different weather systems. One is the monsoon coming through Africa up across Sahara and are lifted by the mountains, giving rain on the summer rain on the eastern slopes, western slopes, while you have a winter situation with easterly winds crossing the Red Sea, picking up moisture, and again orographically lifted on the hillside, giving rain on the coastal plain. In this area, you will find grasses when there is enough rain. Otherwise, you will find that the trees and bushes are very nutritious and wet and nice and good fodder. So yes, they are by all means, they are pastoral herders. Some are actually proper nomads in the old-fashioned way. Others are more transhumant, and most of them hold animals. Even those who are settled in small villages, and they have goats. Was that an answer?
Yes, that was an answer. Do you want to mention the agricultural?
Yeah, I forgot.
Temporary.
Yeah, I forgot that.
Cropping.
There was from day one when I entered the hills. There was talking about the cultivation, because when the rains failed during the so-called Sahelian drought, what failed in particular was agriculture. And agriculture traditionally, and I think for a very long time in history, is based on the so-called Kirag system, where you make very slight modifications, small dams, maybe not more than 20 centimeters high, across the body bed. You place them so that you have some centrally in the body, others a little more up on the sides. And this is an opportunistic way of agriculture. You make these systems, you plant the seeds, and then you leave with your animals and do what you like to do, going with animals. And then you return after the rains, and you can see what have happened. If it had been a heavy rain, then your dams in the central part of the wadi will have been washed away, while the ones further up the sides, there you can catch your harvest. Otherwise, if there's been very little rain, then you can harvest from the central dams. So I will not say it's a lazy type, but you don't invest so much in this. But since at least the large part of the 20th century, the national rulers, being the British and then later the national government, encouraged agriculture. Normally, governments don't like the nomads. They like to have people where they can see them. So they like people to settle. They want them to invest in agriculture. And this was quite successful, and a lot depended on the local agriculture in the hills when suddenly the rain failed. And then, of course, there was no harvest, and the famine and later food relief followed. And this changed a lot of the situation for the Beja for a very, very long time. So if you, on the picture, you can see some dams that a picture we snapshot from the plane when we are flying over.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. So obviously land is very important for these people. And they have a lot of complicated rules about how to share land. Can you, and this is also related to how they deal with possible conflicts that might appear. Can you tell us a little bit about the system of land ownership, Mohammed?
Okay, I will start from the agriculture, what Knut stopped at. And the system that is the terrace system, what we call it terrace system in Bidawet, we call it karabs. And I think life shows something like that in Nuba Mountain also, how to harvest rainwater. Then I come back to agriculture. Agriculture never been a kind of main income for the people who live in the Red Sea Hills. It's subsistence because it depends on the rain. So you can't make a big project depending on the rain, which you don't know. It is semi-arid area. The fluctuation is really high. I think when I did my PhD, Sinkat is 37 millimeter per year. So you can't do a kind of big project on rain. And that was, I think, one of the mistakes that you make a big town like Sinkat depending on a dam, which is depending on rainfall. If the rainfall fall that year, then you don't have water for it. Okay, so the agriculture part is only in two places. Like if you say agriculture that can make income for people, that is the Tokar area, which is flood agriculture. It floods in summertime. The agriculture will come in, they cultivate in late summer and winter time. The other area was very interesting, that you have to produce something that it's not produced in other places. Arkawit example, they can produce tomato in summer, but depending on wells in Arkawit. So that is the reason they can sell, because you can't compete with somebody who is not doing anything and make a product with somebody who is, he need to spend a lot of time, effort to make that product. Okay, now we come to, I will take back until I come to your question, that is the land ownership. Okay. Then we come to the what we talk about. So agriculture is not, animals is the more part. Previously, we call it Berenay. I think Onur can understand that. Berenay, that is the migration with animals between the Gunub and up hills. So they used to do that, and I saw it myself. Like you have to have a big herds to move from seasonal migration between the coast and up the mountain. But after the 80s, when the rainfall start to get less and less, so they lose a lot of their animals. So it has no meaning to move with few animals, because it's not worth it. I mean. Then we come to the land ownership. All the land are, and I think that's not only special there, but all in Sudan, it's tribal land. Then it goes up from the big tribe to the sub-tribe, to the sub-tribe, to the home. So all the land is owned by people. And I think people who are traveling there, they can see that when they are traveling in some place, they think that there is nobody there. They wait there for a while and somebody is coming out from nowhere. They come out and talk to you, how are you, and try to trace what exactly you want there. I will not give you all questions, I will not answer them. And I think you experience that. I will not answer all questions the way you want them. I will answer questions according to let you know what exactly I want you to know. So land is owned by, that is the reason when it comes to building schools, wells, all these things you have to really consult with the local people. And one of the things, I mean, like, that is, I think some people, they feel it is strange. I mean, like, if they are digging a well in a place, they don't dig it that deep, produce a lot of water. Because if you produce a lot of water, then you will produce a lot of settlement around the well, overgrading for their area. So they produce, or they make wells that produce very little, or according to their needs. And wells really is the kind of very critical, because you will bring some people to the area. People maybe we don't know. Maybe also like the overgrading on the area around the well. If problems happen, they have their system, which is, I think you can now see it written in English, they call it galad. The galad, that means agreement between, if the conflict happens, then we will bring a little bit, depending on how serious is the problem and how much you can involve higher level people. You can't go to the Nazir unless the problem is really, really strong. You make your majlis, it can take several days to solve it. A majlis is the kind of, just like a parliament, you have to negotiate. You will bring your very strong people in negotiation, in arguing. They use poems, they use history, they use Quran, they use hadith in the argument they put to win the case. They try to do that now after problems start to happen in Kassala and in Port Sudan. They start to think about the same galad to bring it there. Personally, I think it's very difficult because if you are in the rural area, you are completely under the tribe. You obey everything coming from them. But here, you can't do that. The government is there. I can do what you want because I mean I'm not under the Nadir anymore. I mean, yes, in a kind of historical way, according to my tribe, I will follow. But at the end, and the problem that also the governments start to use that kind of conflict to not support one, but to initiate some kind of problems, so they can win something behind it. And that's what happened in Port Sudan, in Kassala.
Yeah, we will get a little bit back to that.
So I hope that we manage to reach the land.
Yes, thank you. So how is this, if you look back into history, what do we know about this cooperation among the people, maybe conflicts and interaction with outsiders?
It's very interesting, the Beja landscape, because they're never incorporated into a foreign empire. There's so many foreign empires around, and they definitely tried to control as much of this desert as possible for resource acquisition and trade. But that never seems to have been successful. And you could say the same for the deserts in Egypt as well. The same thing, they tried to control the deserts, but never could territorially control it in the way that maybe a modern nation state might try and do. The biggest interaction we see is all these gold miners. And this happens in various periods of history, but there's, from my research, there's 3 distinct gold rushes, I would say. The first is in the Egyptian New Kingdom, so about 1400 BC. So when you know Tutankhamun's gold mask, you have to imagine this gold coming out of the Beja lands of Eastern Sudan. And then there's a gold rush in the Roman period, and again under the Abbasid Caliphate. So these 3 periods brought thousands and thousands of people seasonally into the desert. And when we survey these gold mines, most of what we find is very cosmopolitan. So you could look for the mining settlement itself, and the material in these settlements shows that people were coming here from Egypt, people were coming here from Nubia. We even have some sources that say they're coming there from Ethiopia and Aksum, and they're coming there across the Red Sea from Arabia, and even as far as Syria. So we have lots of people in the ancient world, ancient Red Sea, in Middle East and North Africa, coming to these gold mines. But we also importantly have lots of artifacts that we can connect with the local Beja at these mines. So it seems, even though we don't have a full story, like a text that says what's exactly happening on the gold fields, that there was lots of cooperation. Every gold mine required both some foreigners to come to mine the gold, or for their local markets to trade the gold at least, and also people that were assisting in that gold production. We don't know who is doing what exactly, but we know there's lots of different people from different places at the gold mines. Now, some of the sources also tell us that this relationship went quite awry. Al-Tabari, for example, an Arab historian, mentions that the Beja did not like the resource profit and acquisition. They didn't like how the gold was being shared, and they massacred all the gold miners. And this is in the medieval period. And we also have the same sort of texts going back to ancient Egyptian times. Even some of the members of ancient Egyptian expeditions are Beja who are guarding against other Beja. So there are Beja on the Egyptian expeditions who are more or less mining escorts or soldiers or mercenaries who are guarding the gold miners against other groups in the desert that are hostile to them. So there's always been this background of cooperation and conflict over resources, and it changes, it seems, with every political period and structure. It always changes. And then there's the trade, which is quite symbiotic and brings people into the desert and out of the desert for reasons that are much more peaceful. And it seems to be that both sides profited from this. And then in this period that I discussed before, about 400 AD and onwards, we see the Blemis, the Beja at the time, starting to raid the Nile, first in small groups, but then they came onto the Nile Desert in as much groups as to lay sieges to cities. So there's always been this long, long history of cooperation, conflict, and changes every period in very dynamic ways, which makes it very fascinating to study over thousands of years.
Yeah, thank you. And then that brings us to Nupt, Knut. So Nupt is a very remarkable place, and it's mentioned in some of your sources, Julian, that it's probably related to like a capital, or can you just...
The Beja king, they say in one source, lived at this place in approximately 760 CE.
So this place, Knut, you came across it in 1994, and you understood from the layout, it's quite a big area with a lot of remains of buildings and graves and so on, that it was a remarkable place, even before you knew about this king there. Can you tell us a little bit about...
Yeah, first I will say that it came, Nupt came as something we found in a project that I developed together with Richard Pierce and Noir as a follow-up of the RESA project. We felt that we needed to know since Beja had been so important for the shaping of the ecology and the landscape, we need to know more about the history. So we obtained a fairly good large concession and was surveying stone monuments within this area. And then actually more or less turning around the corner from one core Omek into Core Nupt, suddenly this huge site appeared to us. Later we came to learn that it actually had been visited several times before, but interest had only been in a small Islamic graveyard dating to around 900 AD because of its inscriptions and so on, which are the earliest evidence of Islam in England. And the archaeologists had not really concerned the tremendous amount of ancestral Beja remains that was in this. Virtually, there are, and Julian been laughing because I always say there are thousands, but there are more than 1,000 huge Beja, ancestral Beja graves located in this area. You see on the left-hand side here, a map. We were invited. The reason why we were invited by the Red Sea State Ministry of Tourism and Environment to map the site was there was signs of gold mining and robbing of the area. So we came there and we used drone to map the site down to resolution of a few centimeters. And you can see this rather large area. The lower two parts are places with houses that probably is related to the later phase of Nupt. And then the rest is just all these graves, and most probably the remnants of dwellings have been perishable and are no longer there, but the graves remained. Some of these, a few of these graves are more than 20 meters across. And so you see some of them on the upper part there. On this lower here is what is likely to be the place where the noble part of the population were living, and could be suggested that where you find the king's residence, which is a very, very intricate stone building. Still, Nupt is very, very special to us, and it is the largest site in the Red Sea Hills, and it actually is so prominent that it deserves to be protected at the World Heritage Site.
Yeah, and still, I think many people don't know much about it. So, but as we heard now, the Bergen so have lived in this area for millennia, and mainly as pastoral nomads, but they all also interacted with different groups in different ways throughout the history. But during the last decades, there have been a large change with modernization processes leading to sedentarization, urbanization, and changes in livelihoods. Maybe young people are losing some traditional knowledge about the land ownership and traditional ways of doing animal pastoralism, and as we've seen in Nupt and many other places, modern gold mining is ruining cultural heritage before it's even known and written into history. So from your perspectives, have you seen that changes like this have affected identity and the unity among the Bergen?
Yeah, as a start, there's a difference between the ancestral Bergen graves that we find in Egypt and the ones we find in Sudan. In Egypt, they are all more or less robbed, while in Sudan, they have been protected, being part of their heritage. The Bergen look upon them as their ancestral graves. Of course, they have ideas that the people buried here were huge people, many meters high, and the graves are inhabited by jinns and so on, all which are there to protect it. But after gold mining started, we see that more and more these graves, which they call ecratels, are being robbed, and with some reward, because a lot of them actually contains gold. In Nupt, one time we came, there was the Adarob mining company made a road through the city, and so a lot of graves were disturbed, and then suddenly the young Bergen were not only having silver on their knives, but were actually having gold decorations on their knives. So it definitely weakens the feelings for their history when it's gold mining destroy the heritage. It actually, you have to remember that also the gold mining, at least how it's done by larger company, by bulldozers, are destroying the landscape and makes the possibilities for traditional livelihood difficult. It's not so problematic with the single individuals that go with their mineral detectors, but as soon as these big companies come in, then and it's all over now. It's really everywhere.
You want to add something?
Or? Yes, for the Akratel, I mean, like, really, I don't know. I mean, I was there and I saw them. It's fascinating things. People, they don't used to interact a lot with them. I don't know, because their hands are full with other things, or as Knut say, maybe there are some small bleeds on them. You ask people, who are this? They told you they are Romans. They tell you that they are like tall people. Sometimes curious people, at that time, long time ago, they tried to dig and see, or at least remove the rocks and see what is under these rocks. But after a while, they discover there is nothing there. Like, you don't find something really kind you tell. So if that is spread, that will go for all. Regarding the recent situation of mining, I think I will just say, yeah, it is. I mean, like, Adarob was there and Jabet Al Ma'adin was there since a long time. These are the biggest two companies. They are they are working as proper. Maybe they are using totally different method, because that depending on the ore or on the how the gold is found. Some of them, like in Jebel al-Ma'adin, that's totally different kind from the gold that you find it in Ariab, because you need to make more like chemical analysis for that one. For this one, it is just you can find it on the ground, and that is the one related to the history of the area when it comes to gold mine. If you want to connect it to old Egypt and all these things, how people react with this, or sometimes you rent the land, or you get an income through somebody who is doing the job there. But unfortunately, you don't get that much as the value. It's not depending on the value you get there, because I mean, like, if somebody is getting gold out from my area, I should get a lot of money out of it. So they deal with it the same, like I give you a land to graze on it, but you have to pay a fee for doing that as an owner or as a tribe living on that land.
I just want to add on the cultural heritage. It actually it catch interest as part of the history and identity of the Vedja on all levels, from the goat herder to the tribal leaders, and also up into the central administration. Central administration are more interested for a possible tourism, but the Vedja in general, I only have got positive that this is important, this we must protect, and so on. Also in Nupt, the local tribe that is there chase away gold miners when they see them, but they are of course not so happy to do that when they are armed.
I think Knut's and Mohammed's observations are exactly what I've seen when I've been surveying in this desert. And just to add, I think we need to have a push to protect some of these sites, because the rate of destruction is something that is very troubling. There's so many sites that are being destroyed in a very quick way, not quite comparable to the archaeological destruction you might see on the Nile Valley, where these sites are better well known. They have site guards or facilities, and these sites are so far in the desert that if they are destroyed, then they're often out of sight, out of mind, beyond when people go through there on their nomadic transhumance. And just to add to that, that's part of my Australian Research Council project, is to document these sites. So we do have some sort of gazette and map of the present archaeological state in our Red Sea province, and hands that map on to various government authorities and NGOs to come up with policy solutions.
Yeah, and I think this is something that also will be discussed more tomorrow with cultural heritage and archaeology. So I think we should now try to turn more into the present situation. And so we have seen that they probably even had a king, or at least a common leader among the Vedja. And today we have the system of the Nazirs, which is a state-appointed administrative chief of a tribe. This system was built on customary governance. So I was wondering, Mohammed, how is this? If you can explain a little bit about the role of the Nazirs today, and also which other institutions that represent the Vedja politically today.
Politically, okay. Maybe I should go a little bit when the Sudan independence. I will go fast, or like with some kind of just years and something like that, because I mean, like, the first organized political body for the Vedja was the Vedja Congress, and that was established or like started with Dr. Taha Bleya, the medical doctor, with some elites at that time. That is the 50s, after the independence of Sudan. And that was not exceptional for Eastern Sudan. At that time, you have Darfur Development Front, you have the Nuba Mountain Association with Philip Abbas Bush, and you have the South. They talk about the politics of Sudan. I think that if you can just apply exactly the same model for the Video Congress. Started at that time, banned in 58, back again in after 64. They won several seats in the parliament, and that is even the area is the area of the Khatmiya. They won like more than 7-8 seats, banned again in 69, up again in. The interesting thing is the same. It's a Video Congress. So there's no other movement at that time, but at that, until the 80s, that's the same Video Congress with the same, repeating the same like demands for like the same demand. You can find it for all these peace agreements they signed the government with other parties, like income for the region, and also education, health, and all this. After that is, I mean, the most interesting thing, I mean, like when it comes to the democratic period before the Inghaz period, I feel it very interesting because here, during the election in Sinkat, which is a house, or they call it the home for the Khatmiya, where they have Sitti Mariam Sharifa home there. The Video Congress at that time, they are not the same. They call it Hadot. Hadot, that is the mother of the Hadandawa. They use that name in the election, and they won the Sinkat. So for people like, I mean, like, I'm not working at politics at all. This is the first time to sit in that kind of things. But this is just for somebody who was there, or saw there, or following these areas. Between tribe and you're belonging to a party. Usually what they do, they separate the tribe to two. Like if you have somebody, you want to nominate somebody from an area, especially tribal area, the two should be from the same tribe. So you split the tribe to two when it comes to election and voting. So in Sinkat, they use Hadot, which is a kind of the other version of the Video Congress, for winning that daira. And what they mentioned at that time, the people whom are supporting that, they say that if they lose, they will take the dome down, like al-Gubba, they will take it down, and which is something very strange and very strong, like to be like the identity coming very strong in that kind of situation. Okay, let us go further now. The Video Congress, again, back, yeah, they damned all the parties. In 1993 or 1996, they joined the Alliance Democratical Force in Asmara, or in Eritrea. So they start to fight from there as a Video Congress. Because the area is in the border, so they managed to do a lot of, at least close the road, explore the pipeline, and explore some bridges and some kind of. In 2006, there was an agreement for the Video Congress to come in the government. But I should also mention in 2005, there is the big mass killing of people in Port Sudan. They went out just for normal demonstration for rights and something for rights, and very sad. After that, they make this agreement with the Video Congress in 2006. So the Video Congress started to be a part of the government, which is fall with Omar al-Bashir in 2019. So after that, you can see the Video Congress, how, in what kind of hat it will come back. What happened at that time after the fall of Omar al-Bashir? Most of the party groups start to to mobilize their people around. So they came to Port Sudan several times, to Kassala. Sometimes this kind of mobilization lead to some conflict between tribal conflicts, Port Sudan example, and some in Kassala. Then come the Juba peace agreement, the Eastern Track. For the Eastern Track, I think it was, as all the agreement, is really nice to look at the agreement itself. But who will implement it, or who will represent the defining? That is the main issue. For that reason, there are new bodies, because they are against the agreement or reject the agreement, because they don't see themselves in the agreement. The people whom are representing the Eastern Sudan, they are the Bija, or because in this case they call it Eastern Sudan, which is go up to Al-Rahad, which is the Wilayat al-Gadarif state. So it is Kassala, the Red Sea, and Al-Gadarif. So they didn't feel that, so they established a new body. They call it, what they call it actually, I don't know, it's a long name for it, المجلس الأعلى لوزارات البيجة. Okay, they found that, led by Tirik, who is the Nazir for the Hadendawa. Some people, they feel that it should, like the tribal leaders should not be involved in politics because that's very dirty sometimes. It can be against you. And so the main demand from for this, to reject, first of all, the Juba agreement, the Eastern Track, and also they start to appraise their limit for what they want. I will not say they have been used, but each party, because the government also is not in a kind of one place, you have the military and you have the transition government. So both of them, they start to manipulate the situation to win which side, because they control very important thing, they control the road to the port. So I don't know, I think I went far than you want me to walk, or it's okay?
Yes.
Because I took everything. So I don't know. So yeah, they have been used but mobilized by the military in one side and the transition government in one side, all of it about Juba agreement. They start to block the road. It's so easier to block it because we have a place, they call it Al-Aqaba. And in Arabic, that is when you are going from the up mountain to the coastal area, you have a very high mountains, the road coming exactly across these mountains. So it's so easier to block it down by any kind of means. They block it for one time, and in that situation, they say that they have they first demand that, okay, to reject the Juba peace agreement, the Eastern Track. So they didn't get kind of very clear answer of what will be the situation for them. So they block it for a while, and then, as I tell, each part of the government start to play the role there. And personally, I think they are apart from why, or not 100%, but maybe they have the failure of the transition government with that kind of thing, because you get position in some places like that, which is, instead of solving this kind of problem, you start to ignore it. So it's continuing like that, and sometimes start to close only the port, and that is totally another issue, because that is also what we talked about it earlier today, how the international community or international interest in Port Sudan itself, because, or in the East, or in the Red Sea, all of it. One of them is the mining. The other thing is the Red Sea. There is a lot of groups are interested in the Red Sea regarding the ports. You can find like neighbor of Sudan interested in the port, international or other nation, or they have their interest in what is happening there because they want to put their hand on the port. People are against that if you don't have a solution to change the port, because I mean, like, I will talk a lot. If we take that, I mean also because I mean, like, we go back again, like who is working on the port? I mean, like we have the kallas. We go kallat, the people who are loading, offloading ships manually. If you make a new port, then you will be totally mechanized. And then a lot of people will lose their jobs. You have to have a solution for them. Who are these people? Who are really typical people coming from rural areas? So I think the last the last thing happened also. I mean, like in September, I think there was the first clashes in Port Sudan, led by Sheikh Adarob, who is, because I start, I mean, like to represent a kind of military groups that they also call themselves the BJ Congress. They try to, because at the beginning he's, or the group are really supporting the military against the SF, the
RSF.
Janjaweed. Arafat. Okay, so they are supporting that, and so what he felt that he said that okay, all the government now here, and we see there a lot of aids coming from abroad, but we can't see it in the state. It is all taken out of the state. So they need to hear their voices. So they have some clashes, shotguns inside Port Sudan, and that is the first time it happened after the 15th of April. They cool it down the situation and try to convince him, blah, 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 and something like that. Some people of the local people, they felt, yeah, that is good to let us people hear that we are here also. The last thing, I think there is a new body now, and I think it's a really good one, or at least I feel it can do something, that is the graduates, BJ Graduates Association. And that is, at least for me, it will give another dimension for the how to reflect the more problems you have in a good way, that is instead of.
Thank you for that outline of the recent history. I think we have to start rounding off, and then we will have some time for some questions. So I want to open a little bit. You can have some minutes each with some last reflections. Maybe say something about from your field of expertise to make some reflections of what you see as the future for the Bergen and Eastern Sudan based on our discussion. Maybe, Knut, do you want to?
Well, when you put it like this in the program, I think this is the time where I should step out of my competence and talk about what I do think about politics and ecology. As I see it, there are two different ways of thinking. I mean, when it comes to the political situation, it's either what could be the center periphery thing. You have the city, which has its interests in good intentions of increasing income, both on the national, the local, and of course the personal level. And then you have the ancient tribal system that is there to protect a certain type of land use and land ownership. And this is intimately linked to the ecology. When we came to Sudan, started to work this with taking the theories from the shelf back home and bringing them down, they didn't work. We were thinking about tragedy of the commons. We were thinking about resilience. We were thinking about equilibrium theories, and you name it. None of these things fitted to what we were actually seeing. And maybe because our minds were slow, but it took several years until we started to realize that we had to look into the details of how the indigenous populations were managing their environment. And the new theories of paradigm in called human ecological systems based on are talking about slow systems in different scales. The scales interact with each other, and put the importance of the so-called LEK, local environmental knowledge. And this is what bears what's it really matter how if you copy a tree, if you cut the branch this way or this way, it's absolutely important. In one way, you will stimulate the tree to grow more branches and more biomass. In the other way, it will rotten. These small details are deeply embedded in the culture. So back to the polity. Where will you find in the Bergen Congress knowledge and interest in these sort of things? No. Where you will find it will probably be in the native government systems. At least there's some sort of contact with the traditional systems. I don't think whether they really will be able in the long term, but at least that's where I think there's a better chance to find it. The conflict management in the modern democratic system, you are allowed to have your opinion on absolute everything. I can sit down here in Bergen and have my opinion on the Sami situation in the north. But in the ancient system, the conflicts were solved among those that actually were involved in that. And the solutions were then added to the Selif, and brought further into the as more I thought about this in later years, I thought that I came upon the conclusion that ecology is not democratic. It doesn't care about democratic principles. And you are actually clashing between two quite different things. One is the protection of the environment, and the other is the development of the society. And to this, I have no solution, but I just want to step out of my good boots here and say what I'm thinking.
Thank you. Julian, do you want to add something?
As an archaeologist, I'm definitely stepping out of my comfort zone with future predictions. Always go ancient rather than future. But if I try to sort of project, I always think from what I've looked at in Red Sea province in Eastern Sudan, that its history has always been intimately linked with the Nile and Sudan. And so something that happens on the Nile always affects what's happening in Red Sea province, and this has been going back thousands of years, and to a lesser extent what's happening in Egypt or Eritrea, Ethiopia, and the Red Sea always affects that. And I think this is only increasing with modernization, urbanization, and these sort of things, with diasporas forming in various places and so on. So I would say the further we go in time into the future, the more it'll be affected in this way. The only other thing I can think of as an archaeologist who spent time talking with colleagues throughout Sudan is as a pan-Sudanese phenomenon. This is sort of anecdotal, that there seems to be a greater historical consciousness of the ancient past. We saw the Kandake the other day, we talked about that, and people were talking about Tahaka and famous kings more often. And I think this is also true of the Beja space, where the ancient past is increasing in the public consciousness.
Thank you. Do you have a quick?
No, I think I said what I said but I can separate what is happening in the East from what is happening in Sudan now. Is depending on what will happen in Sudan, there will be a part there, depending on how far it will be, and all these things, it will reflect also in the Eastern Sudan or in the bigger area.
Okay, now I think we will open up for questions. Yes, there is one in the back.
Yes, my name is Lovisa Oll, CMI. So I am political scientist interested in the Horn. So I can't avoid asking more about the fact that Beja, the Beja group is one of 9 ethnic groups in Eritrea as well. Yeah. So I wondered more about the current politics of the Beja group being on both sides of the border, and whether you have a president in Eritrea who's probably interested in not a very stable and politically sound Sudan. Whether and how the Beja people have been used by the Eritrean regime, and whether they also have been managing to somehow have some benefits by being allowed or being able to operate across the borders.
If there's some more questions, we can gather some. Yes, Susanne?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're going to talk about humanitarian aid tomorrow, but you're reminding me of some issues when I was working in Red Sea State, which I wasn't going to talk about tomorrow, so I can talk about it now. There's been kind of large kind of food distributions. I mean, there's 2 questions really. First is that there's been large food distributions in or humanitarian aid since the 1980s in the Red Sea State. And when you were talking earlier about kind of the mobility and the pastoralism of the Beja, I seem to remember hearing that the food distribution points actually became sites where Beja settled, and this kind of continued to this day. So one question is, how has food distribution affected the mobility of the Beja? And the other is more, maybe kind of elaborate a bit more about what's happening now in terms of humanitarian aid. And you mentioned the case of Sheba Dirar faction kind of starting to stop food from leaving Port Sudan. And that's kind of in the light of, the Beja and people in Red Sea State for decades now are amongst the most food insecure populations and showing them one of the highest rates of kind of persistent malnutrition. So, yeah, I mean, something more about sort of aid and its impact on lives in the Beja region.
Olena Dubovik, Geography Department, University of Bergen. Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. I feel like I'm become expert on Beja people now. And what I was wondering, I think this question is to Knut, because you mentioned that you are working in the region since 1986, right? So, and as we learned from the previous panel, the Sudan is a country of coups. So perhaps you witnessed or you were working when there were other coups happening in Sudan. So how was it in the past affecting your work in that region? And maybe we can draw something for the future based on the experiences in the past, like models work usually. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more and then we'll have to start answering.
I was just going to hijack the microphone as it was passing me, if I'm allowed to.
Okay. A quick question then. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I heard that in the course of the mobilization run by SAF, the tribal militias are being set up, and or militias are being set up along tribal lines. And I wonder, in the East, that is, and I wonder if there is more detailed information available to any one of you on who these militias are.
Okay. Okay, that must be the last one because now we have 5 minutes to answer.
Yeah, mine is a quick one to Mohammed Babikir. One of the accusations that I love it against the media intellectuals and the educated ones are that they render themselves hostages to the traditional leadership. And this has been seen quite obviously after the change that happened in 2019. So how would you respond to that?
Okay, then I think you can
Pick what you
take a
want.
round and I'll try to answer what we managed in. You have 1 minute, 1 minute each.
No,
Who want to start?
uh,
Knut, you want to?
Yeah, well, just quickly on food distribution. This is something that we have experienced. There's a general rule about movement among the Beja is that not everybody move. Always there's somebody has to stay and protect the place that you are moving from. When food distribution require that they will feed you in your home area. The Beja the groups often selected an area that was close to places where the food distribution were more frequent than others, and these they have very often then completely changed the pattern of living. So that was just that question.
Okay.
Yes.
I will try to touch in each, and then if they are happy, they are okay. I'm here. We can talk about it. I will start with Manzul concerning the intellectual whom are following the Nazir or that happened. I think because he had the all mobilization for depending on what you want as intellectual. If you are thinking about a position, you will get after any peace agreement. You will follow him because that's the shortest way to get it there. But not because you are convinced about what he's saying or convinced because he has all the mobilization for the people around him. This is for the people whom Bija living in the other side of Eritrea. I think depending on how because I mean we started like with the definition of Bidawati speakers. There are some groups, small groups there on the other side, but I am not really know how politically they are connected to, the example, the Bija Congress in Sudan. Also, I will touch a little bit about this food distribution because before I start coming back to research, I was working for the Red Cross, Oxfam, and regarding this, the dumping food for the food distribution, we call it dumping areas. This is known, and because this is the areas usually where is connect people to come there and collect things and leave, and easy for lorries to drop food there. So this is, how long that will go, that's the question. I mean, it's not easy to answer because if you change the system life or the life of the people, they lost of a lot of animals during the droughts, 80s and 90s. Other jobs are available for them if they move to Port Sudan. Around Sinkat, nothing there because also Sinkat is depending mainly in education and health services. And that is the only place that I can say 90% are Bija in Sinkat. The only town that is kind of completely from them. So what would be the solution? I think that is unless you change what is there, I think it's not so difficult to find the kind of, it will be there all time, this up and down rainfalls and no rainfall. It will be a famine or a kind of, well, they don't call it, they call it food shortage. What the government used to use not to announce a famine in the area.
Okay, I think we have to move on to, do you want to comment some?
I don't feel confident to talk about any of those topics, but just quick on the food aid. I know the British tried to do the same thing where they tried to urbanize rural Beja communities, and some of these villages ended up as markets and some failed dismally. So there's always been a process of trying to centralize, I guess.
Just to
very short comment.
Olena, well, I came my first visit was during the preparation for the election in 1987, I think, that the election was held, and in the period of the Mali, then nothing happened, and people were not very politically concerned. That's at least what reached my ears. But on the other hand, the coup of Bashir changed the situation, and the situation for us also deteriorated to the point where I decided to establish a rescue research area in the southern part of Egypt. So I had 2 places to go, and in case things become too difficult, I didn't have to stop my research. And I also noticed that in periods, the attitude from the authorities towards the local population has changed, and sometimes better, sometimes worse. And I cannot say that I have statistical proof for it, but I have a strong feeling that the more the local authorities try to change the local population, the worse will the situation for those who maintain the environment is. So that's
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for taking part and listening to us.